Thanks again for coming. My name is Dipti Vaidyanathan, and I'm based out of the British Embassy in Dubai, but covering the whole of UAE for education and training. So I'm going to give you a brief market overview on the UAE, on a little bit on the background, what are the educational statistics, how do you do business, what are the cultural sensitivities to keep in mind while doing business in the UAE, and what are the different options to get into the market. So a little bit more on the UAE. It's essentially 7 emirates that's come together, and each emirate has its own ruler. The capital, of course, is Abu Dhabi, and then there is Dubai, which is the commercial capital. A lot of business happens predominantly in these 2 emirates. But that said, there is a lot of potential with the other 5 emirates. So you have Abu Dhabi, you have Dubai, you have Sharjah, Ras Al Khaimah, Ajman, Fujairah, and Al Quwain. So these are the 7 emirates that form the UAE. If you look at the Middle East, the UAE is one of the most stable economies, because of which a lot of business happens there as well. The population is roughly around 9.3 million, and about 50% of it, almost 60%, is basically between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. A large expat population, so you have nearly 85% of people coming from outside, which means you have only about 15% that are Emiratis. So very diverse in that sense, and it's evolved a lot over the last 40 years. So it started off with sand in the desert, and now it's obviously a very booming economy. So why the UAE? The biggest reason is it's, again, one of the most stable economies. It's UK's biggest export market in the Middle East, and it's the 12th biggest export market globally. So there's a lot of potential there. The UK brand is very highly valued. It's a very diverse economy. So it probably started off as oil and gas and, you know, the natural resources. But the government has realized that they need to do a lot more and sort of move from a natural resource economy to a knowledge-based economy. So they're doing a lot. It's not just tourism or infrastructure, but they're also doing a lot for education. Again, a lot of traditional ties that has happened between the British and the UAE government. So it's probably the only country that has 2 British embassies. So there's one in Abu Dhabi, which is the capital, but then there's one in Dubai as well, because there's a lot of business that happens here in Dubai as well. In fact, even in the British embassy in Dubai, where I am based out of, we're basically based on a huge piece of land that's actually been gifted by the Sheikh to the UK government. So there's a lot of historical ties in that sense. A little bit more on how Abu Dhabi and Dubai works. Abu Dhabi is slightly more conservative. You know, they have their oil and gas wealth, so they tend to be a little more laid back in their approach to business. Whereas Dubai is, in that sense, a little more liberal, a little more progressive. Dubai also has the port, you know, it has one of the biggest airlines. So a lot of business happens there. Again, British goods and services are highly respected. What is also happening is that Abu Dhabi, despite being a little conservative, is now sort of realizing that they need to do more with education, they need to do more with tourism and infrastructure, so they're sort of building a lot more in that sense. Some educational statistics, because it's a largely expat population, a lot of people think that, you know, they need to know Arabic to sort of do business in the market, but no, you can get by with English. So knowing Arabic is an advantage, but then you can do business in English. In terms of schools, if you see, British curriculum is the most valued. So there are 14 to 15 different types of curriculum, but then you have British at the top, and then you have the Indian, the American, and the rest that follow. So a lot of demand for schools. What has also happened is that Dubai has won the bid for the Expo 2020. So in that sense, there's a lot of demand for more schools. So currently there are about 158. So how the education system works is you have the Ministry of Education that looks at public schools, which are not too many. And then you have government authorities in Dubai and Abu Dhabi that look at private education. So say if you take Dubai, for instance, currently there are about 158 private schools, but they are looking at adding about 110 schools in the next 6 years, that is before Expo 2020. So there's a huge demand there, and consequently a demand for educational resources as well. If you see higher educational institutions, there are totally about 80 across Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and about 10 UK universities. So how it works with Dubai and Abu Dhabi is Dubai prefers branch campuses of UK universities, while Abu Dhabi prefers that they tie up with local institutions and have representative offices. So that's how they work. So if you see Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they sort of work in slightly different fashion. The other thing, of course, is to keep in mind is there is a demand for educational resources. There is a big demand for the British curriculum that's really valued. So in that sense, there's a lot of potential there. What the government has also done is, like I mentioned, they're looking at a knowledge-based economy. So they sort of, they've allocated almost 20% of their budget purely for education. So, I mean, you get the sense of how important education is on their agenda. Very specific to education, they're looking at special education, they're looking at teacher training, vocational education, and innovative technologies with respect to education. The other thing, of course, is educational resources. So now there is a demand for educational resources, but it is important to remember that this is a very price-sensitive market, and it's a market spoiled for choice. So you have British resources that are valued, but then you also have competition from the US, then price-related competition from India, China, Egypt. So you need to keep that in mind, and you need to define who really you want your target audience to be. And there are a lot of British schools, so in that sense, there's a lot of demand. And as long as you demonstrate a niche, something that you can specifically showcase to the market, there is always a demand for it. So I've just listed some of the things that there is demand for, but again, like I mentioned, you need to have a niche. The model, particularly for educational resources, is typically through distributors and agents. There are not too many manufacturers. There are manufacturers of educational furniture, but if you look at books or online learning, it's typically done through distributors and agents of educational resources. You also have consolidators who typically import resources, and then they distribute it to the bigger region. So that's the Middle East and North African region. So your best bet is, again, through distributors, through if you can get access to large groups of schools. So you have these big schools which have about umbrellas, names which have about 10 to 12 schools under their brand name. Then if you can get through them, they have their own procurement division, and that's another access point. Competition, like I mentioned, of course, is the US, India, China, and Egypt. The USP for UK companies would be, again, affordable, quality educational resources or training. When it comes to training, of course, your entry into the market is through training partners or setting up, offices in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or any of the Northern Emirates. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people think, it's Middle East, so, it's a bit restrictive. There are a lot of regulations. Yes, it tends to be a bit bureaucratic at times, but it's a very relationship-driven market. So initially you might think people are a bit cold, but, the more you meet them, the more you speak to them, they are warm. They want to know more about you, more about your family, more about the weather in the UK, and, that's their way of conducting business. I mentioned it's a market spoiled for choice. Then, of course, you have Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which are where there's a lot of business that's happening. But that said, you have the Northern Emirates and the Western region, where there's not too much happening, but there's a lot of potential, and the governments are doing a lot for their respective emirates as well. So that's something that's worth tapping into as well. The route to market, of course, I've mentioned. So you can, the other thing that might be worth mentioning here is the British Centres for Business, which is basically an offshoot of the UK Trade and Investment and the British Chambers of Commerce. So what they typically do is they help UK companies, small and medium companies, to set up in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, as the case may be, and so they have a hot desking facility where you can sort of set up for 1 year and do business and get in touch with respective companies. A little more about the culture. A lot of decisions are taken at the top, so you need to keep that in mind when you're doing business. Personal relationships, of course, matter. So you might, once you are in touch with a distributor or a company, it makes a lot of sense to come visit the market, meet them, speak to them, get to know them a little better. Try and avoid British humor, because sometimes it's not just taken the way it's meant to me. But be frank, deliver on your commitments, and the rest should be easy. If you get into any contracts or agreements with companies, then it might be good to take legal assistance. So, the consulate obviously has a list of lawyers that we can provide in case you need assistance. But it's just better to have some sort of legal assistance before you get into any contract, especially because it might, if there is some problem, then, it gets easier to come out of it if that happens. Some cultural sensitivities to keep in mind, and this is just an example that I've come across, where one of the distributors had a UK company, so they basically were inviting presentations from different companies, and one of the UK companies had a presentation which had the flag of Israel. So basically one of their clients was from Israel, and they had the Israeli flag, and they were automatically disqualified. So no reason given whatsoever, but it's obvious. So sensitive topics should be avoided as much as possible. So yes, it's not a very difficult market. Do your homework. A lot of people come, when we get a lot of inquiries and they say, we have done business in Qatar or Kuwait, and, we want to do the UAE market, and, these are our capabilities. But we tell them it's not necessarily the same. We get a lot of inquiries of people doing similar services. So you need to have a niche, something that you feel would sort of have interest in the market. So identify what your USP is, what your capability is. Look at it from a long-term perspective, because it's a market, again, it's a relationship-driven market, so you need to keep that in mind. What's important is to remember that it's what's in it for them rather than what's in it for you as the company. So just keep them in mind. And how UKTI can help, we have customized market research that we can do. So if you're looking at 10 to 12 very specific, relevant contacts, we can help you with that. It's obviously at a charge, which is subsidized because it's government. We help in terms of visits. There are exhibitions that we can assist with. The biggest exhibition for educational resources is called GES. It's the Gulf Educational Supplies and Solutions. It's based in Dubai, annual event. The last one was in February, but the next one is in March 2016. BISA normally organizes it, so in case you want UKTI funding support, then you can get in touch with them, and they basically have a UK pavilion, a lot of UK companies that come every year and exhibit. The good thing about GES is also it's not just Dubai or UAE specific, but you also have people from the GCC, from the Middle East that actually come and sort of exhibit, and a lot of potential distributors and school buyers as well, so very relevant. Of course, we do business opportunities is another place worth registering. So it's basically, it's called businessopportunities.ukti.gov.uk. So what essentially it is a matchmaking service where as a UK company you register, it's a free service, you register, and as at the post I meet a local company, a local distributor, and if they're interested in partnering with a UK company that provides, say, educational furniture, as an example, then we post it on the website. And if that is of interest to you, then you get an alert, and basically you write into us and we give you the contacts, and it's basically a potential for partnerships. British Centers for Business, I already mentioned. You can look at their website in case you're interested. Joe Hepworth is the CEO. And so me and my colleague, we look at education and training in the UAE. So if you want to get in touch with us, please do by all means. We are also on Twitter. And yes, so that's pretty much UAE in a nutshell.